Civil asset forfeiture is a process that allows law enforcement agencies to seize your property even if you've not been convicted of any crime. Well, our next guest leads a group that focuses attention on the problems linked to civil asset forfeiture and other related threats against property rights. Scott Bullock is president and general counsel at the Institute for Justice. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
For people who are unfamiliar, just a quick reminder, what is civil asset forfeiture?
Well, it's this bizarre power of government that most people are shocked to find out even exists in a country that's supposed to respect private property rights and due process. It is the power of the government to seize your home, your business, your car, your cash, regardless of whether or not you've been convicted or even charged with a crime. And it operates under this legal fiction that the property is somehow guilty of activity. So civil forfeiture cases have these bizarre names like United States of America versus $2,500 in U.S. currency, or State of Texas versus a Chevrolet Silverado, like the property committed the crime. And what it really amounts to is a convenient excuse for law enforcement agencies to take property that then they financially benefit from.
How big of a problem is it?
Well, it's huge. The federal government does it, and most state governments do it. And the federal government, it generates billions of dollars a year. At the state and local level, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And it's important to point out, too, that this is distinct from criminal forfeiture. I mean, you don't want people to benefit from illegal activity. If somebody defrauds a company and they've taken all the assets and bought a bunch of stuff for their own personal gain, the government should have the ability under certain circumstances and with constitutional protections to go and take that property. But with civil forfeiture, it doesn't matter whether or not you've been convicted or, as I said, even charged with a crime. And the primary problem with civil forfeiture laws is that law enforcement agencies, in addition to the power of civil forfeiture, but they get to financially benefit from this. All of it goes back to the very people who are out there enforcing the laws, which gives them a corrupt and perverse financial incentive to take as much property as possible rather than pursuing justice.
Frequent listeners to this program may know that North Carolina is different from other states in how it approaches civil asset forfeiture. Our state law, from what I understand, is pretty good, but we fall behind when it comes to how the state law enforcement agencies deal with the feds.
That's exactly right. North Carolina has which basically doesn't allow it, with some exceptions on the state level. But what you see in so many states that have pretty good civil forfeiture laws at the state level is that they work with the federal government in order to evade state laws. And under federal law, if it's passed off to the federal government, then the forfeiture can proceed, and the feds keep 20% and then funnel 80% back to state and local law enforcement. That's through processes called adoption and equitable sharing, which kind of sound nice in theory, but what it really is it's violating people's property rights, and it's violating principles of federalism as well, because it is really an attempt to evade state law. People of North Carolina have decided that we don't want to give this power to government, but they work around that and work with the feds in order to take the property.
We are chatting with Scott Bullock, who is the president and general counsel at the Institute for Justice. What can be done about this?
Well, there's a lot of things that are being done, and what's really encouraging is in the 8 years now that we've started a campaign against civil forfeiture, there's been some profound changes. Over 20 states have changed their laws to better protect property owners. Courts are once again becoming more protective of property owners and their rights in this process. And so that's been very encouraging. Congress is once again starting to look at these laws and saying something needs to be done about them. But one of the things that we're looking to do is to bring this issue back before the Supreme Court, too. The court has not looked at this issue in over 20 years. Justice Thomas just issued a concurrence recently, an opinion, where he said it's time for us to start seriously looking at civil forfeiture laws again. And so we think the time is really ripe to get this issue before the Supreme Court.
The Institute for Justice has been working on civil asset forfeiture, but you also see some other related or spin-off threats to property rights. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've seen happen in a number of different instances where government agencies are financially benefiting from their enforcement decisions. And this creates this perverse financial incentive that exists in civil forfeiture laws, but it's also happening in a lot of other areas as well that impact private property rights. And one of the issues that we've become increasingly involved in is government's reliance on fines and fees, where they are looking for excuses really to shake down citizens as opposed to really being concerned about, for instance, property code enforcement. And so we see this in a number of different cities where governments are looking to kind of fine people for minor violations of a city code, which could be even something as minor as not having matched drapes in your basement windows, or in a case that we just filed this week in California, where a person had some illegal chickens in their yard, and then had a minor fine, but then ended up having to pay over close to $6,000 in fees, not only to the government but to a private law firm that was enforcing these laws on behalf of the city. And again, it's not really about truly protecting public health and safety. It's about trying to extract as much money from citizens. And it's a growing problem throughout the country. It is related to civil forfeiture, and it's something that we're dedicating a lot of time and resources to try to putting a stop to.
Why is it important that we go ahead and have some sort of action on this front and stop government from using this enforcement mechanism basically as a moneymaker?
Well, it really, I mean, it violates private property rights. It violates rights to due process, and it also kind of corrupts government decision making as well. Every economist will tell you that incentives matter, and if you give government actors incentives to financially benefit from their enforcement decisions, it's not surprising that they're going to devote more resources toward those types of enforcement actions rather than what they should be focused on, which is pursuing justice and truly protecting public health and safety.
Do you see some positive signs? You mentioned earlier that a number of states have changed their civil asset forfeiture laws. Are people getting it, or is this still an uphill battle?
Well, people are increasingly getting it, and that's really encouraging to see. It's one of these things where once you explain it to people, people can't believe that it even exists. And you say, yeah, this is actually a power that happens in the U.S. And so similar, we fought for a number of years battles on eminent domain abuse, where government was taking property not for public uses but for private development projects. And people thought, how can this even happen in a country that's supposed to respect private property rights and other constitutional rights? And is there a similar reaction to forfeiture? It's typically the only people that kind of support it are people that stand to benefit from it, and that's why we're very encouraged by kind of the progress we've made. But there's a lot of powerful interest groups on the other side of the equation that are fighting to keep these laws in place.